In some of your earliest memories, when you were just a toddler, you've told me that you actually walked off in the woods by yourself, and your family let you do that. What did you do when you got out there in the woods?
Actually, starting as young, as far back as I can remember, I would wander in the woods, and that was basically my home. I lived most of my life in the woods, not at night, of course, but in the daytime. I spent most of my time in the woods. I loved the trees. I loved the flowers.
But weren't there rattlers out there and cottonmouths?
Oh yes, there were creeks. As a matter of fact, there was a creek not too far from the home. And how I survived without a snake bite, only God knows.
Yeah.
Because I did spend a lot of time in the woods and around old stumps and old trees that had fallen on. I'm sure I was a little bit older, but I even crossed the creek on old trees that had fallen down across the creek.
So Mary Sue, tell us about the time that the tree tricked you in the forest.
I climbed trees all the time. I loved climbing trees. And with the large trees, I would climb up on them and get on the branches and just sit and look out into the forest. But this particular day, and I had been doing this, climbing up the smaller little saplings, and so this day I would go up to the top, and I would catch the top of the tree, and I would swing the tree over, and it would bring me back down to the ground.
Right.
But this particular day I went up, and I guess I thought I was a big girl, so I climbed the sapling, went to the top, and swung out, and I came halfway down, and the tree was too big. It would not bend anymore. So I hung there as long as I could, and eventually I had to drop to the ground.
You couldn't even go back up, right? You tried to kick your feet up, nothing happened.
So I had to drop to the ground.
You made kind of a world for yourself in the forest, it seems like. You made a little kitchen, and tell me about what you did out there in the forest, all alone, every day.
Every day. Well, I talked a lot. That's when I did most of my talking. I talked to the trees, I talked to the flowers, I talked to whatever I could.
Yeah.
But yes, I played around the stumps of the big oak trees. I had little pieces of whatever I could find, broken brick, rock, and I used them as little cars, and I had garages, and I had a whole little thing. And then I had a kitchen that I had old boards that I'd made shelves, and I would get the weeds and whatever and make meals, little cakes made out of mud and water. I did whatever I could out in the forest to keep myself occupied. And I would hide, and I loved getting around the trees that had fallen down from the wind and whatever. And sometimes that was my little place I could go and
your world.
My world. I would hide in between them. And if I was afraid, if anything happened at the house, at my home, that's where I would go. And there were hours that I would sit out there.
I know that you always went to the forest when something bad happened, like your brother-in-law abused you, which he did for years. Then tell me what you would do when you went to the forest for comfort. You said the forest was like a mother to you.
That's who I could talk with. I would cry. I would wonder why I was different and why I was treated the way I was. But that was my home. That was my home, away from home, my forest. My forest was that's what kept me going.
That's one of the things that interested me about your story, because I think it's so unusual for a child to have no one at their back, only the forest as a mother. And whenever something happened, you went to the forest for comfort. Even when you were home, it sounds like nobody talked to you. You were silent, and they talked over you at the table, for example. I remember the time you had chicken pox, and poor little thing, you were covered with these oozing sores. No one told you what was going on. For all you knew, you were dying, and they just let you go out in the forest, right?
That's all I could do.
Yeah, and you didn't know what was happening to you.
I didn't. I didn't know